Okay, next slide. So it's very important to us at Muskoka Conservancy as an organization, as well as individuals, that we acknowledge and express gratitude to the Indigenous peoples who have been living and working on Turtle Island for thousands of years, long before the arrival of European settlers who expropriated and displaced them from their homes and the land. Indigenous peoples cared for the land in a balanced way and continue to be stewards of the land, protectors of the water, and sustainers of life. In Muskoka, we are on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, which includes the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. The Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee nations have also walked on this territory over time. Today, Muskoka is home to three sovereign nations, the Wattamohawks First Nation, the Moose Deer Point First Nation, and the Moon River Métis. And these lands are covered by the Williams Treaty, the Robinson-Huron Treaty, and the J. Collins Land Purchase. The Rice Lake Treaty also covers a portion of Muskoka. We honor all Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit for their cultures, languages, wise teachings, and ways of being that have shaped this country since time began. Thank you. So a little bit about Muskoka Conservancy, if you're joining us for the first time, or maybe a little bit of an update since the last time you heard about what we've been up to. So Muskoka Conservancy is the land trust or the Nature Conservancy of Muskoka, and we are a registered charity as well. We've been around since 1987, so we're moving into our 38th year right now. And our mission is to protect and conserve the natural environment of Muskoka. And we do this by directly acquiring land that once protected by us is then protected in perpetuity for all of our future generations. So generally we acquire land through donation. So there's a generous community member who's interested in seeing their land protected. Sometimes communities will raise funds for us to purchase lands as well. And in more recent years, there's been more government grants, family foundations, and funds that are interested in land conservation as well, allowing us to purchase more land in more recent years. So through these generous community donations and donations of funds, we're now protecting 58 different areas across the region of Muskoka. And this adds up to 5,100 acres of land protected, just over 65,000 feet of sensitive shoreline and riparian areas on our major lakes, if you think of Lake Joseph, Lake Muskoka, Lake Rosso, as well as some of our smaller and equally important lakes as well. And we're almost at 900 acres of wetland, which is really exciting. It was just in the last month of 2024 that we sort of surpassed this really big milestone of protecting 5,000 acres in the region, which is really, really exciting. Some of you may have heard about that through our e-bulletins or social media, things like that. So we're very, very excited to be always continuing the mission to continue to protect more land in the area. I'll note that of these 58 areas, just a handful of them are open to the public and do have trails on them for people to come out and enjoy, but most of them are closed to the public strictly for nature conservation. And I always like to just give a little shout out because we are a charity, we're a pretty small organization. We are member based and we rely a lot on our members and our volunteers to support a lot of the work we do. So a big shout out to our members and volunteers. I've just got one more slide before I hand things over to Micaela. Because we're going to be learning all about the QE2 wildlands today, I just wanted to touch on how Muskoka Conservancy is connected to this park and why we reached out to see if we could get a speaker on this really awesome park. So as you can see in this map here, the Queen Elizabeth is this sort of large green expanse of land. The color is a little bit different here in Muskoka. This is the district boundary in yellow. But it expands through Haliburton in through the Kawartha Lakes and up into southeastern Muskoka. And it's a really, really amazing area. And these little orange parcels that you can see highlighted here are some recent acquisitions of Muskoka Conservancy. One of our priorities when we're looking at new potential acquisitions and areas to protect is it's important that they expand and or create connected corridors that wildlife can use, and basically are expanding protected areas. And we're doing exactly this with these two acquisitions. The smaller one here is our Barkway Lake Nature Reserve, which is about 174 acres. And our Bill Dickinson Nature Reserve here is just under 600 acres that you can see are abutting the provincial park and expanding this really important, really biodiverse area that I won't get into too much because we're going to learn all about it right now. So just wanted to show the sort of context of how it relates to what we're doing at Muskoka Conservancy. So now it is with great pleasure that I introduce our special guest speaker, Micaela Cooper. Micaela earned her Bachelor of Science in Environmental Biology and a certificate in Forest Management from Nipissing University, as well as a college diploma for Environmental Technician, Protection and Compliance from Canadore College. Since graduating in 2021, Micaela has completed numerous environmental contracts, gaining invaluable experience, including recently as a wildlife technician lead with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. In April 2024, she began her current role of acting park biologist for the Balsam Lake Cluster, which of course includes the amazing Queen Elizabeth Wildlands Provincial Park, and she'll be telling us all about it today. So I will stop sharing my slides now and we'll get Micaela set up. And thank you so much for joining us today as a guest speaker. I look forward to learning lots today. So let me stop sharing and then we'll let Micaela bring her slides up.
All right, perfect. Can everybody hear me okay?
I can hear you and the slides look great.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda, for having me as your guest speaker. Like you said, I've been here just shy of a year now. Queen Elizabeth is very special. So you kind of already covered where QE2 is. So it's just south of that Gravenhurst area, south of Minden, just north of Norland and north of Seabright to the west-hand side. So this large park, it encompasses 33,505 hectares of space. It's actually the second largest park south of Algonquin Provincial as well. It was established in 2002. It originally was named Dalton-Digby Provincial Park, and about 6 months later, they had changed it to Queen Elizabeth II Wildlands Provincial Park, and that was due to commemorate the Majesty's Golden Jubilee visit in Ontario. From here on out, I'm just going to refer to this park as QE2 just to keep things nice and simple. So QE2 is considered a natural environment type park. So we have rugged canoe routes involving different lakes, wetlands, and portages, and it's home to over 100 kilometers of the Ganaraska hiking trail, as well as lots of backcountry campsites that are available as well. All right, so each park usually will provide a unique opportunity or provide something like recreation or protect a type of habitat or species. In QE2, what it does best is our biting insects. So we have a expression in QE2, and if it's QE2, it will eat you alive. So we have a great abundance of insects, but also a great diversity. So this includes the 3 main biting insects that people relatively hate, but we have lots more other than that. What's interesting is all of these different species require a different habitat type. So for example, our mosquitoes, they require vernal woodland pools, whereas our deer flies, they really like the shrubby vegetation that's found along shorelines, so particularly around the Canadian Shield. So this is a deer fly egg mass. So whenever you're canoeing through, sometimes you'll see these tar-like clusters on the side of sweetgale. So that's a type of shrub found in QE2. So these egg clusters will actually hatch. They'll turn into maggots. They'll fall into the muck layer. That's super important. and then they'll overwinter and emerge as our deer flies. Next, we have our black flies, and they prefer a fast-moving, oxygen-rich type waterways. So Victoria Falls, for example, is a great habitat for the black flies. So if you are visiting QE2, especially in June, make sure that you bring your bug jackets, as there's lots of insects there. Now, with that, there's a lot of other insect diversity that's really, really unique to QE2. For example, we have native cockroaches. So anytime that you flip over some rocks, or if you're walking through and you see these huge rocks that have been flipped over, that's actually due to bears flipping the rocks to get to wood cockroaches, which is their primary source of meat in the park. Now, we also have two really unique species called the giant water bug and pale green assassin bugs. Now, these species use a defense mechanism where they're armed with mechanisms that are in their saliva. So similarly for both species, they'll attack different predators, but in their saliva, they'll have different mechanisms. They'll be able to inject their prey with a type of neurotoxin, which essentially will paralyze their prey. So for a giant water bug, it's the green frog. And for pale green assassin bugs, it would be like the flea hoppers. I actually got to see a giant water bug in the spring take down a green frog, and it was one of the neatest experiences. What happened, it was this giant water bug had wrapped its mandibles around a green frog, had injected it with a neurotoxin, and it also releases enzymes. So these are called proteases and lipases, which will basically break down that fat and that kind of like enzyme layer. So it helps to allow for easy consumption of different prey species like our green frog. So it basically created a frog milkshake, which is really neat. Similarly, the pale green assassin bug, this is an ambush predator. So they'll actually wait for their prey to come across. Then they'll be able to attack and they can paralyze within a second. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about our beloved insects and less about the ones that may gross some of you out. So we also have our monarch and our viceroy butterflies. So you can see that these two butterflies look very similar. They actually exhibit a type of mimicry called Müllerian mimicry. So you can see that the viceroy, the differentiating feature on here is that double band of black along the hind wings. They're also slightly smaller in size, but these two species look similar for a reason, and that's because they're both noxious to predators. That basically means that predators, they taste bad. This is because as a caterpillar state, they're feeding on certain host plants that carry toxic substances. For example, monarchs, their host plant is milkweeds. And for viceroys, their host plant is poplars and aspens. So it has salicylic acid that's a buildup in those plants that make them taste bad to predators. So this is also advantageous to predators that may want to eat them, as they only need to learn one type of warning signal to be able to stay away and not actually eat them. Now, another type of mimicry would be this clear wing hummingbird, moth hummingbird. So this species is a master of mimicry in both their behavior and their looks. So as you can see, it does really look like a hummingbird. It'll actually change the time of day that it's active. So moths and butterflies, they're both from the same genus, Lepidoptera. And moths are more nocturnal, generally speaking. But these moths will actually change their active time so that they're active during the day, just like hummingbirds. They'll also be seen hovering over flowers and collecting that sweet nectar, just as a normal hummingbird would as well. All right, so I'm talking a lot about insects, and one of the reasons why the park has become established is because of this insect diversity. This insect diversity has a huge supply of energy in it. It's basically the fuel that runs the biological engine that is QE2. So if you think about it, whether you're an omnivore, a carnivore, a herbivore, any type of species of wildlife that people love and enjoy about QE2, they're all dependent in one way or another about insects. Insects are also the start of the food chain for many different species. And they're really important because they're crucial for a lot of species that have been declining in Canada and in Ontario. So for example, this is a population change from the 1970s. So aerial insectivores, they've declined 43%. Amphibians and reptiles have declined federally 55% and provincially 49%. Dragonflies and damselflies, 16% of the world's population are at risk. And coniferous plants, 25% of all coniferous plants are vulnerable to extinction. So these insects are really important. They're the fuel that drives QE2. They provide the food for different species so that the food chains can actually exist, and they sustain different animals. Perfect. So the second reason why QE2 is so special and what it brings to the province as a provincial park is this idea of connectivity. So Amanda had talked about the connectivity and how being able to take over the two reserves on the north side of QE2 helps to establish that connectivity in that area. And connectivity is really important. Here we have a circuitscape, also called connectivity mapping. It's essentially the reverse of Google Maps. So for wildlife, this is like their roadmap on how they can get across the landscape. Now, this map is constructed through statistical calculations. They'll look at different habitat types, different wildlife, where there's water bodies or where there's big road networks and cities. And the main goal is to understand and see how wildlife can move. What's their easiest route of transportation throughout the province. So just to give you a bit of a reference, the blue sections, so those are all the areas where wildlife would find it extremely difficult to move around. Now, these are usually in our cities, so like Bracebridge, Gravenhurst, Minden. It's built up, there's roads, it's hard for wildlife to be connected from one habitat type to the next. Now, the yellow areas, so this would be like high-speed movement. So QE2, it's kind of hard to see, but it's outlined in a white border. It's basically the very central aspect of this map, but you can see that there's a lot of yellow. So this basically means that any wildlife in QE2, they can move freely throughout QE2. And that makes perfect sense, right? There's nothing really blocking them in their way. The red areas, those are like the hot spots. Those are where there is a lot of free movement, and there's also a lot of crowding of wildlife. So this would be like game trails. And you can see that a lot of this movement is actually happening in between waterways. So this analysis was run from Quebec to Michigan to Nunavut to New York. So it encompasses all of Ontario. Now, what they were able to see is that for any animal that's moving east or west or north to south across the province, that they would need to go through QE2 as a four-way intersection. So if QE2 wasn't protected, if it became developed full of houses or roads, that connectivity would ultimately be lost, and those landscapes would become fragmented. This would seize the movement of wildlife and limit them from being able to move and lose their genetic variability within their populations. So in the event of big weather events like wind, ice, or fire, or even in the face of the climate crisis, these species need to be able to move in search of suitable environments and sort of look for appropriate resources and habitat. So this movement allows these species to find their food, to breed, to establish their new home territories in the event of something catastrophic. Without that, they are stuck in isolation. And this would, again, they'd lose genetic variability, they'd be susceptible to dying off, and they wouldn't be able to repopulate in those areas. So all this to say, the connectivity in QE2 is really important in animal ecology and also for the province as a whole. Now, the third reason that I'd like to talk about is habitat diversity. QE2 has 105 different landform and vegetation types. Now, landform and vegetation types basically just means your habitat types. It's just a fancy name to establish that's what they're talking about. It's just the habitat. 63 of those are identified as critical habitat. Now, this means that this is the very best example is found in QE2, or it's found nowhere else in the province. So I'll be touching a little bit about the different types of habitat, but one of the critical types are the rock barrens that are found in QE2. And because of this great habitat diversity that we have, it supports so many different types of species. So that's one of the fourth reasons, is species diversity. So this is just an INAT stat page. As you can see, we have over 12,000 observations. I checked this morning, it was over 13,000 observations. This continuously will increase the more that people get out into QE2 and mark what observations they're seeing. In general, we have 164 birds, 36 mammals, 17 amphibians, and 15 reptiles. Now, this is a huge number of amphibians and reptiles, and I'll explain a little bit later on why this is so important. We have 610 plants, 51 butterflies and dragonflies, and 34 different fishes. We also have 29 species at risk. So on here, I have a few different examples. The eastern whippoorwill and the common five-line skink are examples of some of the species that are at risk. But in the park, in QE2, they're actually extremely common. And this is a great thing that they're common. Campers will complain about eastern whippoorwills keeping them up at night, but if you go past the border, hearing them is practically non-existent unless you're in another protected area. Same thing with common five-line skinks, extremely common in QE2. Our job is to make sure that these stay common species. Also here, I have a sandhill crane. This sandhill crane is staying on top of a floating bog mat in a beaver pond. So this is another type of habitat type. This sandhill crane is actually nesting there. It'll leave the park to eat on different farmlands, but then it comes back to QE2 for nesting opportunities. What's interesting here is in the spring, you'll see sandhill cranes a gray color, but in the fall, they turn this rusty brown color. And that's actually due to them washing themselves with iron-rich water. So it's almost like a rusty dust that appears that's left behind on their feathers. Some different types of mammals that we have in the park are like bobcat, and we also have lynx. Bobcats are really rare for Ontario. There's a couple different populations within Ontario. We didn't even really know that we had bobcats until we caught them on our game cameras. As well, we have lynx species too. We knew this from old trapper records in QE2, but we've also caught them recently on game cameras as well. All right, so other than insects, one of the most important animals in the park are beavers. Beavers are known as ecosystem engineers. They're a keystone species. So beavers will be able to create diverse wetland types that are constantly changing across the landscape. And in modifying the landscape, they create habitat for thousands of species that would never live there without them. So beaver ponds of different ages and types can provide habitat for many different species. For example, some ponds are really high quality habitat for dragonflies. The next slide, I'll be showing you a bald-faced meadowhawk. So that's a type of species in which thrive in these types of habitats. And this is because they don't have small fish that will feed on that larvae. Now, other types of ponds that the beavers have created have fish populations, and this supports fish-eating birds like our kingfishers or diving ducks, and lots of other species like ospreys. So our beaver dams create this significant type of wildlife habitat, and they provide for species at risk habitat. So these habitat types can be supported underneath Endangered Species Act. For example, this Blanding's turtle here that's threatened in Ontario. Blanding's turtle does extremely well in QE2, and this is because of the shallow beaver ponds that are created. The first image here is our bald-faced meadowhawk, so I talked a little bit about that one already. Other species that these ponds support are our American bitterns. So those are like our wetland type birds, American bullfrogs, a plethora of other amphibians and reptiles. Here we have a painted turtle, and it's using fallen logs as a resting place to be able to bask in the sun. Wetlands also have a lot of different aquatic vegetation in them, and this brings in moose for trying to eat that vegetation. We also have things like carnivorous plants, and I have another slide to talk a little bit about carnivorous plants, but these are all tied to different size ponds that beavers have indirectly created. So our beaver fens are ecologically significant. I said before that they're a keystone species. This basically means that they're the glue that holds the habitat together. So beavers help in water management. They will create wetlands and help regulate water levels, help in reducing flooding, and maintaining hydrological cycles. Fens will support a diverse array of plant and animal species, like I mentioned in the last slide. And they also help in nutrient cycling by trapping sediments and organic materials, which can help to improve soil health. Now, all of these natural habitats in the park are built by the beavers or influenced by these beavers in a positive way. Now, our park is at the top of the watershed. So other than Black River, our water that's coming into QE2 is from snow and snow melt. The rain that comes in usually just gets transpired by the trees and will leach into the ground. The main water source here is our snow melt. Now, these dams are really important because they allow for a slow release of this snow melt from one lake to the next lake. So Phil Careless likes to use this teapot analogy, and I really like the idea of this. Basically, you'd be able to see that if a lake is affected and influenced by beaver activity, by the color of the water. And this is because as beavers are gnawing and bringing in different plant biomass, say like oak leaves, oak trees, these tannins from the leaves are staining the water, and it's kind of turning the water into this brownish color. Now, as this water trickles from one dam to the next, it builds up on this coloration. It leads to really dark water. And that's how the name Black Lake and Black River got its name. So what's really neat is we've seen what has happened if beavers aren't on our landscape. QE2 was nicknamed the Burnt Lands, and this is because in the 1900s, early settlers had viewed beavers as a resource, right? They had basically trapped them to take their pelts, and they became extirpated from QE2. That means that there is no beaver left in QE2. They were completely gone from that location. Now, after they came for the beavers, they came for the next resource, and that was our timber. So they logged out what they could. After the beavers and timber were removed, the landscape was left to be very dry. There was no, they weren't able to hold that water retention without those dams. So everything that used to be ponds, that used to be lakes, basically just dried up and became shrub thickets. Then one forest fire had led to a 3-year-old forest fire that burnt the entire region. So in QE2, you'll actually still see the remnants of the stumps that are left behind from the forest fires that took place in the 1940s. So next time that you're trekking through QE2, definitely take a look and try and see if you can find these charred remains. That's basically speaking to what the history was in QE2. So through this forest fire, it had burned down what was left of trees, shrubs, and that large dust layer that was on the soil. So the rock barrens are actually a result of these actions. It's an anthropogenic thing. This park should actually look more like Algonquin Provincial Park, in which is thickly vegetated, has a thick dust layer, but because that we burnt off that layer, it's exposed rock underneath. Eventually, the rain came and washed that sediment off. It created these shallow ponds, and then the beavers were able to move back into the landscape. They were able to regenerate this landscape into what is QE2, which is essentially a pristine environment removed from human influences. Now, QE2 does have different LUP owners and cottages on. There is small private parcels that break up its connectivity in certain areas. But generally speaking, QE2 is a very pristine environment. So we know that beavers are a keystone species. We absolutely need them on this landscape to keep QE2 whole, to protect our species, our habitat diversity. But sometimes there's human beaver conflicts. As you're all probably aware, beavers can create flooding in certain areas that are undesirable, such as on roads that can lead to washouts, or on like increasing the water levels that might affect cottages on the lake. So to reduce this chance of flooding, a new kind of thing that we've been using is beaver baffles. So beaver baffles will basically help to level out that water, remove the chance of extra flooding by still having that harmonious kind of relationship with beavers on our landscape. All right, so we know that the park is a beaver paradise. And I had mentioned before, it's also a paradise for herpetology, for amphibians and for reptiles. It's a herpetologist's dream world. We have more amphibians and reptiles in QE2 than most of Ontario has further south of us. And this is because of the shallow, warm wetlands, again, created by those beaver ponds, along with those undulating rock barrens that were created in that big forest fire. Now, once you get off the Canadian Shield, you'll decrease in species diversity. And this is just because it gets colder. It's the rock barrens that create this warm microclimate that's warmer than almost anywhere else in the province. So these rock barrens, although they look really inhospitable, they actually will grow different bryophytes, like our different examples here, smooth haircut moss, rock spike moss, pincushion moss, and different lichens, like our smooth rock trite. Now, these species potentially could have been there and growing and establishing for over 170 years. They're very important. They're also a very unique species. There's a lot that have not been identified. So it's a great opportunity for people that like to study bryophytes and lichens to be able to get out into QE2, possibly identify a new species. All right, so I had mentioned that these rock barrens create a microclimate. The way this is possible is that the rocks in QE2 have about a 30-degree angle to them. So they're acting like solar panels. It's essentially creating a microclimate that's as hot as Florida. And the species that we find in QE2 are basically just in QE2 or Point Pelee and south down to Florida. It's an awesome spot to find our five-line skink. So our common five-line skink that's represented here. Now this is the juvenile, so you see the bright blue tail. Other species, like our coniferous plants, this is our spoon leaf sundew. So it has little dew secretions along our spines, very interesting species, as well as our bladderwort and pitcher plant. Now, Amanda, am I good to keep talking, or do I still have time?
Yeah, you're good. We've got 20 more minutes till 11. So keep going and we'll have some time for questions around 10:55, 10:50.
Okay, perfect. I'll try and make the rest of it quick here. So one of the mammals that we have in QE2 are our moose populations. We actually have a very healthy population of moose here, and it's one of the last healthy populations left in the province, along with populations in Kawartha, Killarney, and Algonquin. These species are really interesting. They're actually the fully aquatic member of the deer family, but they are a fairly new species in Canada. They've only been here for about 10,000 years. They came after human settlers arrived in Europe. Now, where white-tailed deer and elk, on the other hand, have evolved to North America over millions of years ago, they've been able to adapt to different parasites. And they've been able to use these parasites inadvertently as biological warfare to be able to kill the moose that came later. So this is through brainworm disease. And just for time considerations, I'm not going to go through the life cycle. If anybody has a question on it, then I can talk about it. It's a very complex life cycle, though. And it starts off with an infected snail and the deer picking it up while it's grazing. And it lives in the brain of the deer. It's very common in deer. It's not in moose. If it is picked up by moose, it will kill off the moose that gets infected with it. So the takeaway here is deer with brainworm disease are unaffected. Moose will contract the brainworm disease, they'll die. There can't be a large population of moose if there's a large population of deer. To support a healthy population of moose, we'd essentially have to try and support predators like wolves that'd suppress the population of deer. Now, other types of parasites that are within QE2 that serve a really important role are Clinistonia marginatum. This is called the yellow grub. So again, I won't go through the cycle in depth here, but the takeaway is the yellow grub gets into the different fish species. It irritates their skin, and it allows different fish-eating birds, like our kingfishers, our great blue herons, to be able to actually pick up these fish. And it helps to support our population of fish-eating birds. Without them, these species would starve on the landscape. So this is really important. Parasites are not always a bad thing. They've actually adapted and they work with different organisms to help support a healthy trophic system. So this is an example of social parasitism. This is actually probably my favorite example here. QE2, we have two different species from the genus Polygerus. Polygerus will basically steal the pupae of another genus type of ant called Formica. So these species, Polygerus, are the enslavers, and they'll be able to steal their crown by taking over the host queen. They'll have to convince the colony that she is the new queen, though. To be able to do this, she has to disrupt the recognition process. So by doing that, she will groom herself in the scent of the old queen by covering herself in that nest debris. Once she's convinced them and she earns the title of a queen, then she gives rise to a good-sized colony, and then she'll be able to send out small groups to scout out a new host. So she'll send out these different types of ants. They'll raid a new host and steal their brood, bringing it back to her nest colony, and which whenever those ants mature, they'll become housekeepers for the colony. Basically doing all of the dirty work that the queen and her species don't want to do. All right, this is the last slide, or second last slide. It's basically just showing the symbiotic relationship between yellow-bellied sapsuckers and ruby-throated green hummingbirds. So our yellow-bellied sapsuckers, they will create these drilled holes in soft trees like aspen trees, and they're probably one of the first migrants in the spring to come along. Now, whenever the ruby-throated green hummingbird comes in the spring, there's no flowers that have emerged yet. So they're reliant on the sap that's similar in sucrose content as it would be for flower nectar. So they are able to benefit from this. Now, the symbiotic relationship basically means that both species are benefiting. So the hummingbird will be able to pick up the sap, and by doing so, it's preventing those scabs or those holes from scabbing over, which allows the woodpecker to not have to drill as many holes. They also will defend those holes from other bigger birds, such as like phoebes, warblers, that be able to take more sap. So there's kind of a mutual understanding between our woodpecker species, our sapsuckers, and our hummingbirds, that if the hummingbirds are protecting, if they're only eating a small amount to what other birds would be eating, then that's okay. And it helps out the sapsucker, the woodpecker as well. All right, so I'm finishing it up here. Basically, to just recap, QE2 is extremely special. We have great, there's a biological fuel that drives through this park, and that's through its insect diversity and its insect abundance. Our connectivity, our habitat diversity, and our species diversity as well. So I'll stop it there, and if anybody has any questions, please go ahead and do that.
That was awesome. Thank you, Micaela.
No
Feel
problem.
free, folks, to unmute yourselves to ask any questions you have or put them in the chat. Yeah, I learned a lot, and it really highlighted the importance of all the critters in the ecosystem and how like just nothing would exist if we didn't have all of this biodiversity. We did just get one question from Sherry. Um, where would she be able to find a map for hiking the area?
Okay, so for maps, the newest map is on the Ontario reservations, the QEII website. You can also get downloadable maps off of Venza, though, and those are geo-referenced. So that's a really great app to get. And again, it's a free downloadable map. If you would like some hiking recommendations as well, I did create some maps and some routes just to show you that our park steward, Glenn, had recommended before. So just let me know if you want those recommendations as well.
Okay, great. Any other questions? I'm not sure if you had your email address in there, Micaela, or if you're interested in sharing your contact information if folks did have questions um, after the fact about hiking or anything like that.
I'll add my email into the chat box.
Okay, perfect. I can forward that around as well to the folks. Frank asked, will the park remain unorganized? I guess not like official open to the public park.
So the park is a non-operating park. So basically, we don't have a lot of people that are on the park taking care of it necessarily. There's a limited amount of staff that are out there. For now, it is going to continue to be a non-operating park. And so with that, it's free camping, use at your own risk kind of thing. We're out there, we're doing maintenance in the areas, but it's very much a wilderness, semi kind of rugged experience.
Mm-hmm. Kyle asked, when is the best time to visit the park? What time would you recommend?
If you don't want to get eaten alive, I'd avoid June. The fall is a really nice time to visit the park. If you don't mind, though, then just bring your bug spray, just bring your bug jackets, and just get out anytime in the summer. Canoeing opportunities in the park are fantastic. There's lots of different routes. It's very, very pretty to check out. Again, lots of different species to see in the park as well. To go along. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Micaela.
What is the bear population? So although we don't have like exact numbers for the bear population or what the carrying capacity is, the bear population is healthy in the park. We do see lots on our game cameras, and they do provide an important role in the park. There is bear hunting that's allowed as well. Kyle asked the best access points throughout the year. I'm just going to share my screen just so I can show a map to go along with that.
Go for it.
Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. There we go. So the red dots here, those are our main access points. So we have Victoria Falls, Devils Lake, and Little Gull Lake. For the people that are coming from Muskoka, Gravenhurst area, Victoria Falls is probably the closest access point in there. The blue also is indicative of different spots where you can put in for a canoe and different canoe routes. There's a lot more than that. These are just the recommended routes. So I can show you here if you just want to go into Victoria Falls. The three different hiking routes. One of them is the Ragged Rapids Loop. So that's about 16 kilometers. At the middle point there is Blackfly Junction. So that's Glenn's recommendation as a turnaround point and a good lunch spot. Our second trail that you can take is the High Falls Loop. This would be like an overnight trip. There's campsites along the east side of Rainy Lake. And then we also have the Montgomery Creek Loop up in that area as well. That's approximately 12 kilometers. And I couldn't fit it all on one map, so I just got it on two here. These are actually maps taken from the Ganaraska hiking trail. So that's another thing that I wanted to mention there is they have these PDF maps available on their website. The Ganaraska hiking trail also does guided hikes too. So perfect for anybody that wants to do some winter hiking in QE2 and check it out.
I think there's a couple of people that wouldn't mind having those maps shared as well. So maybe after the presentation, I'll get you to forward them to me, Micaela, if you have them at hand. And I can send those with the sort of wrap-up email to the group as well.
Perfect. Yep, that sounds great. And then I just saw a comment, Glenn, who I was talking about. He says that you can find detailed hiking information within the park, and you can contact the Ganaraska Trail Hiking Association, the wilderness section. So a little bit more information there.
Thank you, Glenn.
Yes, thank you.
One last question it looks like in here is if you know much about Lyme disease in the park and if it's sort of active in the area.
So it is active in the area. There are a lot of ticks in QE2 and just in general south of the province. So tick checks is always a really important thing once you're out of the field, even throughout the day in the field. If you're staying on trail, though, a little bit less risk of that. You're going through longer grass, and your rates of picking up a tick definitely increase.
Makes sense. I'll just take a scan through, but I think we've gotten all of the questions that are in here for now. So like I said, I'll send around that wrap-up email and I'll include Micaela's information if you ever have any little follow-up questions. But thank you, Micaela, so much for being our guest speaker for January. Like I said, I learned a lot, and I'm sure our attendees learned a lot as well. So thanks so much, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day.
Perfect. Thank you again, and thanks to everyone else that attended. Please feel free to send me any questions if you have them later on as well.
That's awesome. Thanks, everyone. Take care.